Hey love, how you doing? I am eating some lettuce, granola, and I'm recording you a story. So let's continue with the mouse and the child after our little, when we were very young, binge. Do you think that's where we'll find the rabbit and the flea circus, said the child. Shall we find the seal and the elephant and the dollhouse out among the other dots? We can't find anything unless we continue to move ahead, said the father. I don't suppose there's any chance of that until after this performance. The rehearsal continued to the afternoon while the starlings set up scenery and props on the open ground beyond the pine woods, where a bowl-shaped hollow from the natural amphitheatre. Toward the sunset, the blue jay was heard screaming, "Cause of Art presents." "What are you presenting?" he yelled as he flew overhead. "We'll announce it at a certain time," said Crow. "I want the audience to come to it with an open mind." "Presents exciting new play," shouted the jay. "Bank robber wind-up makes dramatic bow tonight." And he was gone before the crow could correct him. "That's pretty fancy billing for a couple of unknowns," said the crow. Bird of the world that he was, he refrained from questioning his new recruits about their past. "We have a small following," said the father wryly, and in his mind's eye he saw Manny Rat. When the evening came and the full moon, rising honey-coloured above the pines, showed the scattered crowd converging in the snowy bowl, the animals and birds paid their acorns, beech nuts, seeds, and grubs, along with turnips and dead beetles saved for the occasion, and were ushered by the starlings to their places, where they combined sniffs, growls, whines, and twitters to the general murmur of the audience waiting for an entertainment to begin. The crowd filled up in a semicircle on the slopes of the tiers, facing flat open space that was the stage at the center of the hollow. There were pines at both sides, and on the slope of the rear of the stage, the tattered length of brocaded crimson velvet attached to the trees was the curtain. From behind it, the mouse and his child and a little troop peeped out at the audience. "That's a good house," said the crow as the bowl filled up. "There is a place for art in our meadows. There is a genuine need." "It's a need for something," said Mrs. Crow. "Let's hope it's for the last visible dog." Now the starlings rushed back from the ticket-taking and ushering duties to sing an overture, and the lively music lilted over the moonlit meadow. The audience sighed and leaned back, and Crow strode on stage in front of the curtain, throwing back his wings to receive a burst of applause. "Thank you," said Crow, "thank you, and as you know, the cause of art has stood for the best in the wholesome family entertainment for longer than most of us care to remember. We have brought you classics and chorus girls, always moving with the times, and always striving to offer art that is new and vital." He paused, and his voice took a more serious note. "Tonight," he said, "we continue the tradition. We offer you the newest effort of one of the deepest thinkers of our time. The Cause of Art Experimental Theatre Group proudly presents The Last Visible Dog, a tragicomedy in 3 acts by C. Cervantina." There were scattered groans among the applause that followed. The possum shifted uneasily in his seat and said to his wife, "I'm afraid he means business this time." "Stay awake, that's all," said the lady as the starlings lifted the curtain to reveal 2 large rusty grapefruit juice cans in which sat Miss Crow and Crow, their heads covered by their black wings. Eutebre's voice was heard off stage behind the scene. "The bottom of a pond," she squawked. "Mud, ooze, rubbish, and water plants. 2 tin cans standing upright and half-bird at center stage." An irate weasel rose from the audience, baring his white teeth in a snarl. "You watch that stuff," he shouted. "We don't want any of your modern filth around here." "Tell him, Alf," called one of his friends, and a low growl rode through the crowd. I love that his name's Alf. Crow and Mrs. Crow duly rose from their tin cans as Wurza and Furza. The rabbit, as Gretch, entered and stood on his stone, shading his eyes with one paw as he looked around, hopeful of investing his silence with heavy meaning before he settled into immobility. "Get that phony rabbit out of here," yelled the tired porcupine. "Bring on the chickadees." His fellow playgoers broke out in laughter when cat calls, and the actor did not become audible until Wurza reached a line, "A manyness of dogs, a moreness of dogs, a too muchness of dogs." "That's what this play is," shouted an enraged Martin. "Too much of a dog." "The meadow isn't ready for this yet," said the local field mouse critic to his wife. "And neither are the woods," said she. "Also a jiggling and wiggling," continued Wurza, scanning the crowd nervously. "A jiggling and wiggling of what?" said Furza. "Of nothing." "That does it," yelled Alf the Weasel. "Let's go, boys." "Look out!" screamed Mrs. Field Mouse Critic. I love that's her name. But she screamed too late. The starlings backstage fluttered up in time to escape, but Crow and Mrs. Crow disappeared in a rush of weasels before they could get off the ground, and the rabbit lay dead, his lifeblood staining the moonlit snow around him. What? Crow's happy! This is not okay! Man! Oh, and then we've got the field mouse critic. One so seldom gets anything really complete from these road companies, said the field mouse critic. Oh, good. Mrs. Crow, scattering weasels right and left with her wings, cried, "Hoodlums, you don't deserve art." Crow defended his wife and himself like the veteran trooper he was, but they were unable to break clear. "Come on, fellows," he gasped. "You're acting like a bunch of hayseeds." The monstrous child, unwound and motionless, watched the disaster while the Tirpe, on a bough above them, swore solely to herself. "This looks like the end of the cause of art," she said. "In a couple minutes there'll be nothing left but fur and feathers and a few bones." "Can't you do something?" said the child. "What would you suggest?" asked the parrot. "Wind us up," said the father, "and send us on stage." "Certainly," said the flabbergasted Tirpe. "Why not?" She went at the father and, shaking her head, watched him walk across the snow, pushing the child before him. The weasels, who were striving ardently to end the crow's career, looked up as the backward-walking mouse child bumped into them and stopped. The father continued to tread in the snow without being able to move forward. "Excuse me," said the child. "What is it?" said Alf. Row by row, the crowd on the slope stood up for a better view of the two small figures, and some of the playgoers began to titter. "We were wondering, sir, whether you might have seen a seal," said the child. "A seal?" said the weasel. "That's right," said the father. "We're looking for a seal, and there's a rat looking for us." Crow and Mrs. Crow listened as they lay at their backs, wings folded prayerfully, while several grinning weasels sat on them. "She's probably out beyond the last visible dog by now," said the child. "And he's probably hiding behind with the last visible pine," said the father. "She used to have a red and yellow ball on her nose," said the child, "but she doesn't have the ball anymore," said the father. And there was more laughter from the crowd, this time louder than before. Crow and Mrs. Crow let out their breath in a joint sigh. "Go on, Alf, help him find the seal," called the weasel's friends. Or at least stand aside and let us go on before our spring runs down," said the father. "We gotta find an elephant, too," said the child. "Then we're going to look for a territory of our own," and the crowd roared its approval. "That little act has something," said the field mouse critic to his wife. "I think that last visible dog business is just a build-up for this. This whole thing is a joke. Too bad it backfired on the rabbit." Animals sitting near the critic heard and passed the word along. "They're marvelous," said a mole. "They're almost animal-like." The weasels on stage chuckled good-naturedly while father and son walked straight ahead until they bumped into the rabbit's rock and fell over. The crowd laughed until it cried. "Do it again!" shouted the audience. "Encore!" The weasels cleared the stage, and crows flew up into the pines, and father and son were carried back to where they had made their entrance. As the mouse father, rewound by the helpful weasel, started once more across the stage, he looked beyond his son and saw a familiar figure waiting in the shadows of the pines with a heavy rock uplifted. The child, walking backward, heard his father whisper, "Manny Rat." "Yep," the mouse child cried, but Manny Rat was downwind. No one else had seen or scented him yet. The audience laughed, anticipating a new comic variations in the Toy Mouse Act. The irony was just too much for the child. It made him too giddy. "Just let it happen," said the father. "Your line." "Just let it happen," he said to the father. "Your line." "Banker Rat Sneak," yelled the father, "more deadly in his treachery than a trapper who wished sawtooth steel besets in the land woodland path." Manny Rat, watching the two small figures advancing toward him in the moonlight, was startled and made vastly ill at ease by his father's shout. Then he wondered whether it would not be better to withdraw for the moment, and he turned back to the pines where he had left the elephant. But the audience had moved closer on the stage. He could not escape unnoticed. "Banker Rat Sneak," yelled the mouse child at the top of his little tin voice. "What new pitfalls is fitting prepared for us?" "Ah," said the audience, and settled back to watch contentedly. "Does he hound us still?" declaimed the father. "He drove us forth to wander denless through this world." "He hounds us still," the child replied, still advancing backwards toward Manny Rat, who could retreat no farther, and now tried to make himself as small as possible. "Ah!" Banker Rat Sneak, skulking in shadows, called the father, "Come out and face your victims. The day of reckoning has come, this final fateful day that settles all accounts, this day that shall leave one for us to share territory with the worms." "Come out!" roared the audience at once. "Banker Rat Sneak, come out!" "What kind of outfit is this?" complained Alf Weasel. "When they finally give us someone we can get our teeth into, the actors fall asleep on the cues." He strode across the stage to the wings, growled, "Let's get on with it," and pulled out Manny Rat. Oh, no! Whew. My clock almost ran down, but I'm having fun. Unhand me, cried the rat, and improvising desperately, he crept on stage. I, Banker Ratsneak, have come here to collect a debt long overdue, he wailed. I will have justice. Villain, screamed the cloud, territory stealer. Tremendous talent, that rat, said the field mouse critic to his wife. How well he plays the villain. I've never a character I detested more thoroughly. And the rest of the spectators, who shared, uncritically, the same emotion, hissed and booed at the hapless rat. Manny Rat, who would have been well content to abandon his role, could scarcely make himself heard. Justice, he wept, and the audience, responding eagerly, rushed the stage and mobbed him. And we'll finish see what happens to Manny tomorrow. I like this is going. Whew. Alright, sweetheart. Sleep well, keep calm, fine llama, carry on. And I'll talk to you in the morgens. I love you, Christy. Good night.